Welcome to this sixth session on reading the writings of Shoghi Effendi. The idea of this is it reflects back on youth classes we used to have in the Holy Land when I was living there. And the idea is to, from time to time, survey some of the very essential writings and statements of the Guardian about the nature of the faith, given that he was the interpreter of his teachings and has focused on considering the great breadth of the Baha'i teachings on so many subjects. He's focused on certain essential verities and on overview pictures of Baha'i history that are unavailable elsewhere. Is the only place you're going to get it. And the point is that by carefully reviewing and looking at these various statements, we implant in our memory phrases that then appear when we're talking about the cause, when we're asked to say something about the central figures, about Baha'u'llah or the Master or the Bab, and also about an overview of the first Baha'i history, now early Baha'i history, which in this case, Shoghi Effendi has given us several views of it, one on the dispensation and another in the forward to God Passes By, of course, in more detail in the chapters of God Passes By itself. But in the forward, he reviews the 4 periods of the first Baha'i century. Now, we had come 2 weeks ago, the last class. We had been looking at the resume of the history, and then in the breakdown document, looking at what Abdu'l-Baha has, what the Guardian has said about first the Bab and then Baha'u'llah, and now Abdu'l-Baha is where we're taking this process up again. I need to get this on the screen for you. Let's see. I think that brings it up for you. Can you see that? I hope so. All right. Starts off, look, the Guardian reminds us that Abdu'l-Baha has a name of his own, which is Abbas Effendi, and he's the eldest son of Baha'u'llah. As we know, Baha'u'llah had a number of sons, Abdu'l-Baha being the eldest, and Abdu'l-Baha being the one whom Baha'u'llah appointed. And these are the 2 things you want to remember with respect to his station. One is that he's the lawful successor of Baha'u'llah. Notice the words carefully chosen. In this case, lawful successor, and the next one, an authorized interpreter of his teachings. So these are very good titles of Shoghi Effendi, of Abdu'l-Baha in this case, to remember. Now, how would you summarize the role, the life, and position of Abdu'l-Baha in the cause of God? We know he's the 3rd of the 3 central figures, but in a category, as we've read previously, quite distinct from the Bab and Baha'u'llah, not being a manifestation of God, yet being a mysterious mirror of the qualities possessed by the manifestation of God, to such a degree that no one can ever rival him or match him in that role, nor has anyone in history recorded it by in religious history ever come close to this either. So now think, how would you describe Abdu'l-Baha's life? And look what Shoghi Effendi does with these bullet points we see here. That since his early childhood, he had been closely associated with his father, and he shared his exiles and tribulations. right from the beginning. He went with Baha'u'llah from Tehran to Baghdad, then later to Adrianople, to Constantinople, Adrianople, and finally to Akka. He himself remained a prisoner after Baha'u'llah's passing until 1908, at which time, as a result of the Young Turk Revolution in Turkey, he was released from his confinement. As you may remember from reading Baha'i history, the government Ataturk and what took place at that time with the Young Turk Revolution, they released all the political and religious prisoners. Abdu'l-Baha, being freed from prison in Akka, established his residence in Haifa. So we have a bit of the picture of the movement of his movements here. And then soon after, he embarked on a 3-year journey to Egypt, Europe, and North America. And in the course of this journey, he expounded before vast audiences 2 things: the teachings of his father, which is clear to us from hearing and reading about the principles that he expounded on, and predicted the approach of that catastrophe that was soon to befall mankind. He literally implored his audiences to arise to create a condition of peace. After the 3 years are finished, he returns to his home, this time in Haifa, of course, on the eve of the First World War. So he's there 13, and then the war begins shortly after. And it was in the course of that First World War that Abdu'l-Baha was exposed to constant danger. And this went on until the liberation of Palestine by the forces under the command of General Allenby, who was fighting with the Ottoman, with the Turkish forces, and who extended after he took over Haifa, consideration to Abdu'l-Baha and the small band of his fellow exiles in Akka and Haifa. Now we see in 1921, Abdu'l-Baha passes away, and he was buried in a vault in the mausoleum erected on Mount Carmel at the express instruction of Baha'u'llah for the remains of the Bab, which had previously been transferred from Tabriz to the Holy Land after having been preserved and concealed for no less than 60 years. So you'll remember that it was after Abdu'l-Baha was released in 1909 that he interred the remains of the Bab himself in the shrine which he had erected. So these are, like, it seems to me, essential points that we want to bear in mind. We could maybe reduce some of them for a quick resume of talking about the history of the cause. But we don't want to leave out the central role of Abdu'l-Baha. It's too important. Now, moving on, and this is still based on the Palestine Statement, or what's called that early resume of the writings that Shoghi Effendi prepared for the UN committee, the special UN committee that was looking at the role of different faiths in the Holy Land. The document goes on to say the passing of Abdu'l-Baha marked the termination of the first and heroic age of the Baha'i faith and signalized the opening of the formative age of the faith. Now, there's charts that can be made about these different periods, but I think it's clear to you that the heroic age of the faith, the first and heroic age of the faith, began in 1844 and finishes in 1921 and consists of 3 periods: the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha. With its termination, Shoghi Effendi indicates we have the opening of the formative age of the faith. Now that's began in 1921. We don't know how long it's going to last. It extends into the future. Shoghi Effendi has indicated various stages, but we don't know how long it's going to take. It depends on the situation of mankind, the will of Baha'u'llah, the actions of the Baha'is, all kinds of things involved in it. But this administrative order has, in this first period that he's indicating here, which brought us up to the 47, it's witnessed the gradual emergence of this administrative order that's described by Shoghi Effendi here as whose establishment had been foretold by the Bab. I think you're familiar with the reference in the Persian Bayan to, well is it with him who reacheth the order of Baha'u'llah, whose laws, now it's established, it's foretold by the Bab, then its laws are revealed by Baha'u'llah, and then the outlines of the administrative order were delineated by Abdul-Baha in his will and testament. Presently, its foundations are now being laid by national and local councils, which are elected by the professed adherents of the faith, and which are paving the way for the constitution of the World Council to be designated as the Universal House of Justice, which in conjunction with me, in conjunction with Shoghi Effendi as its appointed head and the authorized interpreter of the Baha'i teachings. Now, these are the two titles he's reminded us, that he's the appointed head and the authorized interpreter, again, identical title with Abdul-Baha with respect to interpretation. Together, they must coordinate and direct the affairs of the Baha'i community. And the seat of this House of Justice and of the administrative order will be permanently established in the Holy Land in close proximity to its world spiritual center. And that world spiritual center is constituted by the resting places of its founders, of its three central figures. Shoghi Effendi immediately goes on to say that the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'llah is destined to evolve into the Baha'i World Commonwealth. Additional points, he says, it's already survived the assaults launched against its institutions by such formidable foes as the kings of the Qajar dynasty, the caliphs of Islam, the ecclesiastical leaders of Egypt, and the Nazi regime in Germany. It's already extended its ramifications to every continent of the globe, stretching from Iceland to the extremity of Chile, the city of Punta Arenas. So he's describing a picture of the cause before the birth of the State of Israel. It has gathered within its pale representatives of no less than 31 races, numbers among its supporters Christians of various denominations, Muslims of both Sunni and Shia sects, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists. Of course, these numbers have long been exceeded, and you can find in the most recent volumes of the Baha'i World Book updates on this. There's an even mention about the translations of Baha'i literature into so many languages. Here comes, that's coming now. It has published and disseminated through its appointed agencies, those agencies operating under national and local assemblies, Baha'i literature in 48 languages. It's over 800. Has already consolidated its structure through the incorporation of 5 national assemblies. Now there's multiple national assemblies and local assemblies with incorporated papers. And this in lands as far apart as South America, India, and the Antipodes. In corporations that legally empower its elected representatives to hold property as trustees of the Baha'i community, and as a nonprofit organization also administer the funds and contributions to the cause. Then the same administrative order disposes of international, national, and local endowments, estimated at several million pounds. You can only imagine what they are now, and spread over every continent of the globe. Enjoys in several countries the privilege of official recognition by the civil authorities, enabling it to secure exemption from taxation for its endowments, paying no tax on the properties that it holds in the name of the Baha'i community, and to solemnize Baha'i marriage, which, as you know, has to be witnessed and affirmed by an assembly. It numbers among its stately edifices 2 temples, the one erected in Russian Turkestan and the other on the shore of Lake Michigan at Wilmette on the outskirts of Chicago. I have to look elsewhere to see what happened to the first house of worship in Russian Turkestan. Abdu'l-Baha himself dedicated the grounds for the erection of what he called the Mother Mashriq al-Aqsa, the Mother Temple of the West. He said that all the others would be daughters or children of this Mother Temple. By the way, friends, that makes the grounds of the temple a holy place. We have another holy place, which is the house where Abdu'l-Baha stayed in Montreal. But Shoghi Effendi has also said, because the holiness, this is the holiest house of worship, and because Abdu'l-Baha was present, and wherever he's been present constitutes the potential for a holy place, he dedicated the grounds, and that becomes then a shrine in itself. This administrative order, now he begins contrasting this a bit with the past. Unlike systems evolved after the death of the founders of the various religions, where the followers had to invent something to carry forward their cause. But in our case, it's divine in origin because it was foretold by the Bab, its laws have been issued by Baha'u'llah, its structure and institutions have been outlined by Abdu'l-Baha. So the 3 central figures, all on divine authority, have established the basis of this administrative order. And as it says here, rests securely on the laws, the precepts, the ordinances, and institutions which the founder of the faith has himself specifically laid down and unequivocally established. And it functions in strict accordance with the interpretations of the authorized interpreters of its holy scriptures. So that means that these institutions of the faith, from the House of Justice on and down at all levels, regional, local, national, regional, and national levels, are bound by the interpretations and authorized interpreters of its scriptures. The administrator itself, it was fiercely assailed, he points out here. Ever since its inception, it has, by virtue of its character, unique in the annals of world's religious history. And it's managed then, succeeded in maintaining the unity of the diversified and far-flung body of its supporters, and enabled them to launch unitedly and systematically enterprises in both hemispheres designed to extend its limits and consolidate its administrative institutions. Of course, we have the divine plan operating by individuals who've traveled in different parts of the country to spread the faith, but finally, Shoghi Effendi, after having held in abeyance the systematic prosecution of the divine plan in 1930, from 1917 to 1937, he launched the first 7-year plan in the Americas, and then later in 45, he launched the second 7-year plan in Europe. This has enabled the Baha'is to launch unitedly and systematically enterprises in both hemispheres designed to extend its limits and consolidate its administrative institutions. Now he pulls back further and takes a broad look at the whole question. The faith which this order serves, safeguards, and promotes. Such an interesting combination here. We have the religion, we have the revelation. Now he's telling it that this is an order that serves this faith, safeguards it, and promotes it. It should be noted in this connection essentially that it is an interesting series of characterizations here. Supernatural. Supernatural, it comes from God. It's based on revelation. Supranational. It's more than international. It's supranational. It supersedes the individual rivalries between nations. Very beautiful description here. Supernatural, supranational, entirely non-political, non-partisan, and diametrically opposed to any policy or school of thought, notice here, that seeks to exalt any particular race, class, or nation. Here we have the three false gods that he points out to us in The Promised Day Has Come: racism, communism, and nationalism, which are, of course, these are schools of thought that seek to exalt one race over another, one class over another, or one nation over another. Supranational in character. It's free, this administrative order, from any form of ecclesiasticism, has neither priesthood nor rituals, and it's supported exclusively by voluntary contributions made by its avowed adherents. This points out to us the importance of those coming in contact with the cause and learning about its teachings, eventually understanding that there is such a thing as membership and that it has its privileges and its responsibilities. In fact, if we go back to the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the reason we've been created is to recognize the manifestation of God and adhere firmly to his teachings. In that connection, friends, I was thinking the other day, we know from the obligatory prayer and from other tablets and so on that we've been created to know and worship God. We have been created to know and worship God. That's the reason we're here. That's the reason we exist. How much attention should we be putting on understanding what this knowing and worshiping God consists of, based on the writings? One of the great gateways to this knowledge is the gleanings. What Shoghi Effendi suggested should be the constant companion of every faithful believer. It's so important to renew our vision spiritually. As great as the administrative order is, it requires devoted Baha'is who are grounded in the essential teachings of the faith, in the verities of the cause, in order to serve it with full authority and filled with divine confirmations. We've seen it's non-political and non-partisan. And here we see, though loyal to their respective governments, because this is the command of Baha'u'llah, not just the administrative order, we have to be obedient and submissive to any established government. Though imbued with love of their own country, national, patriotism is not a problem here, but not to the degree where nationalism becomes a god. We're anxious to promote at all times the best interests of our respective governments. We are loyal to them and want to promote their best interests. Now, we may ask ourselves, some of us as Baha'is think that by entering into political partisanship and promoting one view of the future over another, we'll be able to help. But it's nothing in the writings that indicates that. It only says it will destroy us if we enter into political activity and adhering to one party or another. We are supranational in character, and we really need to keep that in mind. The followers of the Baha'i faith, nevertheless, Shoghi Effendi states quite clearly here, viewing mankind as one entity and profoundly attached to its vital interests, will not hesitate to subordinate every particular interest, be it personal, regional, or national, to the overriding of mankind. And then he states, knowing full well that in a world of interdependent peoples and nations, the advantage of the part is best to be reached by the advantage of the whole. Very important, essential principle to cause. And that no lasting result can be achieved by any of the component parts if the general interests of the entity itself are neglected. So we go along and we've solved the national problems of one country through our support or whatever we may think we're doing, but the rest of mankind is left out. We want to be, by being Baha'is, we've come to some higher position of viewing the situation of mankind. Shoghi Effendi, in writing a letter, as I recall it, to the guides, the temple guides, suggested that they should be very cautious about not mentioning political parties nor political figures in discussing with visitors to the house of worship, which of course is the basic Baha'i principle. But he said that they could bring attention that the Baha'is, rather than focusing on solution to problems at the national level, their teachings are centered on the international level. Back to this supranational vision that we have to have. It's difficult in the present political atmosphere, climate that we live in to do this. But we should be remembering this because it's essential to the safety of our cause. If we're behind some political activity in this country or in another country or in Burma or whatever, wherever we are, it can reflect on the view of the government in other countries about the Baha'i community and their land and cause them to be concerned. But if we promote the interests of mankind as a whole in all of our dealings with the public and concentrate on the role that we've been given of diffusing the Baha'i teachings to the peoples of the world, making them aware, first proclaiming its existence, and then if they show interest, deepening them and getting them into the core activities of our faith and the study of, in our study circles and so on. That is the best way to move forward according to my present understanding. Another hold on a second. I need to bring up another screen for you here. Here we are. 4 periods of the Baha'i faith. All right. Can you see that? I hope you can see that now. 4 periods of the first Baha'i century. Now we're covering essentially the same material, this time in 1944. Now, the other material was later. It was 1947, I believe, is the original document we've been looking at. And now we're going to look at the same material revised and looked at in the foreword to God Passes By. I think you'll remember from one of the earlier sessions, we looked at how Shoghi Effendi characterizes the 3 central figures of the faith. So beautiful, so helpful to us, because it's very hard for us to define such transcendent themes and subjects. So this first period, he tells us, he reminds us again, centers around the gentle, the youthful, and irresistible person of the Bab, matchless in his meekness, imperturbable in his serenity, magnetic in his utterance, unrivaled in the dramatic episodes of his swift and tragic ministry. It begins, and this is this first period, of course, is about the Bab. It begins with the declaration of his mission, the Bab's mission, and it culminates in his martyrdom and ends in a veritable orgy of religious massacre, revolting in its hideousness. I think this is God Passes By. Shoghi Effendi is writing, introducing in the one major volume that he's written in his lifetime, God Passes By, once and for all, a statement through his divine intuition, his capacity as authorized interpreter of the Baha'i teachings, picking the most important things. It's characterized, he says now, this first period, by 9 years of fierce and relentless contest, whose theater was the whole of Persia, in which above 10,000 heroes laid down their lives, in which 2 sovereigns of the Qajar dynasty and their wicked ministers participated, and which was supported by the entire Shia ecclesiastical hierarchy, by the military resources of the state, and by the implacable hostility of the masses. What a time, what a dramatic time that was. Of course, we have that marvelous volume, The Dawnbreakers, produced by The Guardian too. He edited and translated this volume so that we might understand the importance of the mission of the Bab and of the early Babis. Then he moves on, he says the second period of these 4 periods, second period. It derives its inspiration from the august figure of Baha'u'llah, characterized here as preeminent in holiness, awesome in the majesty of his strength and power, unapproachable in the transcendent brightness of his glory. Very useful for us to remember these characterizations. It opens with the first stirrings in the soul of Baha'u'llah while in the Syed Chal of Tehran, of the revelation anticipated by the Bab. So it takes its parting in October 52 and attains its plenitude in the proclamation of that revelation to the kings and ecclesiastical leaders of the earth. That was a 2-staged. The proclamation proper it takes place in Adrianople, and the sequel to the proclamation of the kings and rulers takes place in Akka. And then this period terminates in the ascension of its author in the vicinity of the prison town of Akka. Now, friends, I'm not talking a lot about each of these little points because the whole idea here is for us to capture this encapsulation of very particular sensitive points to be recalled. We don't always have time to give an elaborate history. We've got lots of, but these things we don't want to lose sight of. It extends this second period over 39 years of continuous, of unprecedented and overpowering revelation, almost 40 years of revelation from Baha'u'llah. It's marked by the propagation of the faith. And here we begin seeing the diffusion of the cause. Neighboring territories of Turkey, of Russia, of Iraq, of Syria, of Egypt, and of India. And it's distinguished by a corresponding aggravation of hostility, represented by the united attacks launched by the Shah of Persia and the Sultan of Turkey, the two admittedly most powerful potentates of the East, as well as by the opposition of the twin sacerdotal orders of Shia and Sunni Islam. Now he focuses on the third period, 1892, with the passing of Baha'u'llah, to 1921, when we lost Abdu'l-Baha. Period revolves around the vibrant personality of Abdu'l-Baha. Again, he characterizes this for us. What a terrific gift this is. Abdu'l-Baha, mysterious in his essence. Abdu'l-Baha, unique in his station. Abdu'l-Baha, both astoundingly potent in both the charm and strength of his character. It commences with the announcement of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah, a document without parallel in the history of any earlier dispensation. Attains its climax in the emphatic assertion by the center of the covenant, in the city of the covenant, as you know, is New York City, of the unique character and far-reaching implications of that covenant of Baha'u'llah, that document. And it closes with his passing and the interment of his remains on Mount Carmel. By the way, the greatest holy Leaf was the custodian of the will and testament of Baha'u'llah, of Abdu'l-Baha. And she is the one that made the decision that Abdu'l-Baha should be interred in a chamber temporarily for that time in the shrine itself. So the front room that many of the Baha'is have been and seen, the shrine, the present day shrine of Abdu'l-Baha, was originally a meeting room where Abdu'l-Baha gathered with the friends in preparation for their visit to the shrine of the Bab. Later then that became incorporated as the shrine of Abdu'l-Baha. This period, he says, it will go down in history as a period of almost 30 years duration, in which tragedies and triumphs have been so intertwined as to eclipse at one time the orb of the covenant itself, and at another time to pour forth its light over the continent of Europe and as far as Australasia, the Far East, and the North American continent through the disciples of Abdu'l-Baha. Then he moves on now to the fourth period. And for the purposes of God Passes By, this was 1921 to 1944. He tells us that this period was motivated by from the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. That charter of Baha'u'llah's New World Order. I want to understand there's three major charters There's a charter for the development of the World Center, which is the Tablet of Carmel. There's a charter for the propagation of the cause, which is the Tablets of the Divine Plan that were written by Abdu'l-Baha during this First World War. And then the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which Shoghi Effendi likewise identifies. He identifies those other ones in other messages. This is the charter of Baha'u'llah's New World Order, the Will and Testament. And then he tells us what it is. He said it's the offspring resulting from the mystic intercourse between him who is the law of God and the mind of the one who is the vehicle and interpreter of that law. The inception of this last period of the first Baha'i century synchronizes with the birth of the formative age of the faith, of the Baha'i era itself, which includes both dispensations, with the founding of the administrative order of the Faith of Baha'u'llah system, which is at once the harbinger, the nucleus, and pattern of his world order. So we should understand there's two different stages in the growth of the cause here. The flourishing of the administrative order of the faith, and then a subsequent period, which will be the development of the world order. And there's certain indications of what has to happen before we get to the world order of Baha'u'llah. This period, the one he's referring to here, covers the first 23 years of the formative age, has already been distinguished by an outburst of further hostility of a different character, accelerating on the one hand the diffusion of the faith over a still wider area in each of the 5 continents of the globe, and resulting on the other in the emancipation and recognition of the independent status of several communities within its pale. Now, these stages of emancipation, of persecution, attacks against the faith, emancipation, and recognition are stages in the development of the cause, which Shoghi Effendi elaborated with beautiful statements in a message that he sent to the Intercontinental Conference that was held in 1953 on the centenary of Baha'u'llah's having received the intimation of his mission while in the Syed Shah. And this is something we're going to look at a little bit later too. And then so we have these different stages that we want to consider to understand what the difference is between them. Now we're coming to a third document here. This is taken, as you'll see, from Message My World, page 155. This is the expanded edition. There was an early edition which didn't have all these messages, and then it was printed with an addendum of additional messages, which is the one that's generally available now and the one that's online in your Baha'i document, different Baha'i documents, collections of Baha'i documents. He tells us, because he's been looking at the 9 stages, the 10 stages in the development of the cause in this message, which is another thing you want to look at, because again, it's one of these terrific overviews that he's established. That there's a process of tremendous significance which will carry the steadily evolving faith of Baha'u'llah through its present stages. Here he says, stages one or another of which Baha'i national communities in various parts of the world now find themselves. So The present stages he refers to are obscurity. Nobody knows what the faith is. Repression, they find out something about it and start opposing it. And that repression leads to clarification of what it stands for and gradually emancipation in different countries. And that will eventually lead to recognition of the faith. That is the uh, government recognizing the legitimacy of Baha'i agencies and giving incorporation possibilities to national and local assemblies. These are stages, he tells us, one or another of which Baha'i national communities in various parts of the world now find themselves. And that will lead eventually, and he talks about how which countries have been through which stages, not here, but in other, in God Passes By, for sure you can find details about this. It'll lead to the stage of what we could call the fifth stage of these seven, which is the stage of establishment of the faith, the stage in which the faith of Baha'u'llah will be recognized by the civil authorities as the state religion in a country, similar to that which Christianity entered in the years following the death of the Emperor Constantine. A stage which must be followed stage of the Baha'i state itself, the coming into being of Baha'i states around the world as the majority of the peoples of these countries embrace the cause of God and promote and devote themselves to its development. So Baha'i state functioning in all religious and civil matters in strict accordance with the laws and ordinances of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the most holy, the mother book of the Baha'i revelation. This is a stage which in the fullness of time will culminate in the establishment of the World Baha'i Commonwealth. And we saw the reference early on to everything moving forward. Now, what is this World Baha'i Commonwealth? Seventh stages. Functioning in the plenitude of its powers, and which will signalize the long-awaited advent of the Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth, the kingdom of Baha'u'llah, mirroring, however faintly, upon the humble handful of dust, this humble handful of dust, the glories of the Afaq kingdom. Now, friends, this Baha'i Commonwealth is very dependent on the Baha'i development of Baha'i states, which is also then dependent upon the earlier establishment, recognition of the position by civil authorities of the faith as a state religion. This is the beginning of this. So you can see how the formative age of the faith is going to extend into the future quite a ways before we get to the golden age of the cause. A little clarification here. Elsewhere, there's a bit more emphasis on the fact that the Baha'i state, when the states of the world, when the majority of them, that is the majority of the nations of the world become Baha'i states, then the House of Justice will call into the being the World Baha'i Commonwealth, functioning in the plenitude of its powers. Now, these stages, can be explained to students of the cause, but we want to come on them gradually because they could be misunderstood from a political point of view. And we need to understand that this is in no way enforced on mankind. It's not obligatory in that sense. It's something that comes about through the gradual recognition and incorporation in the souls and hearts of the peoples of the world. The proper position of Baha'u'llah and the establishment of his kingdom. Well, it's I think quite a mouthful for one session. Let's see if you have any questions. I haven't looked at the chat things. What's happened? I can look at the. I think we want to go back to that, Jen. Let's see. So I'm going to talk to the. No, I don't want that. Oh, this. Yeah.
That's where your face is on screen.
It is on now. All right, I think I'm back with you. I hope I can look at these questions and see what's coming up. Can you please elaborate on how the administrative order is non-political, as in what that means? The administrative order does not enter into the politics of the world, which presently is, for the most part, national in character, individual countries, and that we should avoid making comments on national politics for the safety of the international Baha'i community. Also because Shoghi Effendi says they're palliatives, the initiatives that nations may take during this period of the evolution of national Baha'i communities and eventually the birth of Baha'i states. They're palliative actions, they're temporary actions that countries will take, but they will be constantly suffering under the deterioration, because Shoghi Effendi says that the nationalism has become effete. It's incomplete because it's not addressing what Baha'u'llah has brought for mankind, which is a solution at national level. The question, would you agree that capitalism promotes the interests of one economic class just as much as communism does? Well, that's probably a question I need to think about a little bit, but my impression is that no, it doesn't promote one economic class. When it's in a democratic state, it allows for people of all degrees in the society to own property and to progress in their individual wealth. Of course, the countries are all in different states of administration. Some of them do that very well, and others, they have promoted interests which allow people to collect vast economic interests, and that ends up promoting that those that have most of the money are running things. Now, that's obviously, we know from the Baha'i teachings that there has to be a sharing of wealth, and there has to be a participation of the workers in the earnings of capitalists. All of that has to be, it's a big subject, has to be looked at, I think, from various quotations in the writings, some of which you can find in the master's explanations in some answered questions. Somebody said the screen is blurry. I hope it wasn't too blurry to all of you. Somebody else says it's clear. a few years ago, someone says you mentioned in a talk that something significant would likely happen in 2021. Can you comment on that again? I don't think that was me. I think that was one of the other former House members. Dear Mr. Dunbar, when The Guardian wrote, in which tragedies and triumphs have been so intertwined as to eclipse at one time the orb of the covenant, what time or event was he referring to? Gwen, I think that, as I understand it, this is the referred to in the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. It's the time when Muhammad Ali tried to usurp the authority of Abdu'l-Baha as the orb of the covenant, as the light of the covenant, and attribute to himself that role, claiming that Abdu'l-Baha was acting like a manifestation, though he didn't say so. He was acting like a manifestation, therefore he was to be superseded by Muhammad Ali. Quite an event. All right, friends, I think that just about does it for today. And I wish you a very happy week, and we'll get on with our review of the essential verities of the cause starting next week.